Hey, Cleopatra. Ooh, chilly in here. I'm home away from home in the black Benz limo with the cellular phone. Clean away, drum, make the girlies get dumb. I'm rolling reindeers and the girlies wanna get dumb. Every time we do this, sucker MCs wanna battle. I'm the man they love to hate cause they arguing of Seattle. Man, y'all don't know about that old Sir Mix-a-Lot, do y'all? Y'all be sleeping on Sir Mix-a-Lot. Y'all think Baby got back all he had, but man, he was coming with it. What's today, the 2nd? Man, 10, 2020. Chauncey, co-conspirator number 2. Let's fade that out. It's instrumental for Posse on Broadway. Sir Mix-a-Lot. Shout out. Welcome to our 25th Q&A with Bro Diallo. I'm sorry, I know my schedule's all jinky, but I'm trying to get my life together, y'all. But you know, we'll get together. We'll have a tight schedule soon enough. I'm live on YouTube and Facebook at Diallo Kenyatta across social media. Of course, this is kind of a free-for-all brain session. You ask me a question, and I'll tell you what I think or what I know. If I don't know, I'll be honest and tell you I don't know. Or if maybe it's something with the Google machine here in front of us, we can figure out together, hand in hand. So that's how it goes. So welcome. Thanks for tuning in. I'm sorry, I know this wasn't scheduled, but dinner's coming a little late. I was with Dita. We were chopping firewood and stuff, and I got back late. Then we had to go get something. Tonight is vegan taco night. So Professor Mingo had to make a store. So, you know, it's just my life, you know, mad busy, you know. But before we do any of that, let's take a moment of silence on behalf of the coronavirus. The coronavirus has contracted Trump. Y'all know y'all talking about Trump called the coronavirus, but he's such a wretched, disgusting man. I'm going to call it. Trump didn't catch the coronavirus. The coronavirus caught Trump. You know, you imagine, gross. So I want to send out our thoughts and prayers to the innocent coronavirus that has been corrupted and contaminated and it is sick with Trump. And I know it's doing everything it can to exit that man's wretched body and get out of him. So, you know, I just want to start this Q&A off with a moment of silence so that we can send out our thoughts and prayers to coronavirus and the coronavirus family. Okay, that's enough of that. Oh, so let's proceed. If you have any questions on Facebook or YouTube, give a shout out. Today is the anniversary of Nat Turner, who was born on this day in the year 1800. Now, that's speculation. They didn't keep very good records of birth dates and track the movements of our enslaved ancestors, but to the closest historians have been able to lock it down. Today is the closest they could assess, because I know Harriet Tubman and many of our great ancestors, Frederick Douglass from chattel slavery era, and many of our people we've descended from, we don't have the best records, but they kept very good track of the wealth. They've got very good ledgers of the wealth that our ancestors generated, but because our ancestors were considered chattel property, there's not very good records of their birth. But today is Nat Turner Day. We had to lock in a day, and like I said, there's some pretty accurate historical and archaeological records saying that today was the day that the late great Nat Turner was born in the year 1800. So happy Nat Turner Day, everybody. Who? Omar knows all the anniversaries. Who's Omar or Umar? Are you just messing with Umar? I don't want to bring down the wrath of Umar. I ain't had grits in 3 weeks. Sending my grits money off to Dr. Umar. So I'm making a sacrifice for the all boys Alpha Academy. My oldest son, unfortunately, I think when Umar started his school, my oldest son was, I think, in the 7th or 8th grade when Umar proposed his all boys school, and he was in Virginia somewhere in the woods, and he was going to take all these boys to the woods and to lock them away in bunks in the woods so that they could be real men instead of punks. And he had to pivot on that because the land sold at auction and he didn't have his shit together. And remember, Dr. Umar said the reason an NBA player, an unnamed NBA player, was going to give him millions of dollars to open up the boys' school, but because somebody was hating, said something, released, I think it was the conscious stripper, conspired with the Illuminati and the gay mafia to frame him because he was abstinent. No, yeah, he was celibate. No, he said he was celibate. I'm celibate, brother. He was celibate. And this conscious stripper, it's just a whole thing to bring a strong man down. And my son was in the 7th grade when that school was proposed, and he graduated high school in 2020. But I still have another son that can be saved from the agenda if y'all put that grits money up. I still have another son who's just a little 7th grader. So if y'all get that money up, we can save my first son has graduated high school, and he's off and a full-on victim of the agenda. Because y'all didn't, the conscious stripper, the Illuminati, and the gay mafia undermined his hidden school out in the woods for boys only. He was going to take a bunch of boys out to the woods and lock them in dormitories with no girls and not even no girls, and no women teachers, and then that was going to make them as heterosexual as possible. Anyway, who am I to question? The great grandson of Frederick Douglass. But I digress. See, this is the kind of stuff I talk about. So if y'all don't ask me questions, and y'all talking about, don't mention to me LeBron James school. I already talked about, I got real unpopular. Y'all belted me with tomatoes and hateration when I asked some questions. I didn't even criticize. I asked some questions about LeBron James Promise School. And if you go back, what is that, a year or two? Y'all don't talk about the school no more. But remember, I pulled up the administrator of that school, a white woman, all the directors, the teachers, white women. And it's like all those white folks and all those Nike, that shrine to Nike in the foyer of the school. And he said, y'all said Umar was going to get them kids backpacks and bicycles. And I don't know, where is that shit right now? And that's the thing. I've been working with and for. The first not-for-profit I ever worked for is when I think I was 15 or 16 years old. No, 16 years old in Kansas City, was the Stop the Violence Coalition. And I joined the Stop the Violence Coalition to end violence in the Black community. Anyway, I'll stop rambling when y'all ask me a question. This is a Q&A, so feel free to interrupt me. But I went there, and there's two parts of the charity and not-for-profit and giving of the goodness of your heart. You give the upfront money, and then after the upfront money comes the evaluation, because you give the money for a cause. Like my cause at my first not-for-profit, it was the K. Kellogg Foundation gave money to the hood, to the streets, for us to come up with programs to intervene on violence in the Black community. And so the problem was violence. We had all the stats on violence, everything from interpersonal violence, gang or street violence, domestic violence. And okay, this is the violence when we started. Where's the violence? And what is the intermediary period? What is our agenda? And then what ends the violence? And in time, they pay people a lot of money for this thing called evaluations. And they get these scholars to evaluate whether or not all this charity, all this input, all these free backpacks, and all this good, this righteousness, whether it amounts to anything. And we always look at the front end. Ooh, Cosby sent 1,000,001 Black kids to college. And okay, why did he send those kids to college? To improve the Black condition. What were the issues in the Black condition? According to Cosby, single motherhood, violence, drug addiction, teenage pregnancy. So when he sent those kids off to college, was there a mandate that they come back and work to the hood, in the hood, or that they marry a black spouse? There was really no controls or fixes. So there's really, um, besides the goodwill he got, what was the positive outcome? So if I'm a billionaire and I spend a couple of $1,000,000, which is chump change, and I get all these people worshiping me as a savior, but there's no demonstrable change in the condition I contributed the money to, why do we give the praise? But I digress. We finally got some questions. Jay-Z, okay. Jahi asked, let's say someone famous, let's say Jay-Z reached out to you and said he liked your work and wanted to support you. First, would you accept his money? And second, if he gave you, let's say, $10 million, what's the first thing you would do with the money? If Jay-Z reached out to me and wanted to give me some money, no strings attached, first I would ask, just like the phone app, what are your terms and conditions? Hell yeah, I would accept the money. I'm like Wise Intelligent. I ain't turning down nothing but my collar. And so if he gave me $10 million, the first thing I would do was, do everything in my power to hide the fact that I had $10 million. Number two, the first thing I would do is the second thing was try to make sure nobody, I wouldn't come out and tell people I had this money. The second thing I would do is I would immediately put those funds in a trust or form an LLC or some type of independent entity that would be available for public scrutiny. So I wouldn't want to hold the money as Bro Diallo or in my government name, in my God-given Christian name. I would rather put the money in a place where the money could be accounted for and the dispersions of the money could be tracked by public record. So, you put in an LLC or form a not-for-profit or some other body where there will be absolute transparency, because there's a lot of money changing hands and hands being shook, and a lot of people saying stuff like, oh yeah, he took the money and that. So I wouldn't Umar y'all. That money would be open to public scrutiny, where anybody who wanted to take the time, individual or organization, wanted to take the time and say, Diallo got this Rockefeller fund or this Rockefeller grant. First thing I would focus on is cooperative economics. I would put the money into cooperative ecological startups. Second, I would put the money into bottom-up cottage industries. Bottom-up cottage industries are where you can, in a local position, create useful products, goods, and services from the inside out. Home services, production chains. I would set up a production chain. Let's say you go down to, like, surrounding the city of Chicago is a lot of abandoned and underutilized lands. I would set up land abatement in terms of the toxicity of the land, set up urban farms. And with those farms, I'd set up intermediate transport, food processing, and then plants where if you grow herbs, you can turn those herbs into tinctures and salves. If you're growing produce, you can make that produce available, and even refurbish old furniture, home replacement. So I would set up on, and I know what y'all thinking, oh, you sound like Booker T. Washington. Absolutely. I would set up a Booker T. Washington style cottage industries, but not from a entrepreneurial, but from a cooperative economic socialist. I would put about half the money into that bottom up cottage industry, cooperative economic, production chains type economic development, not individualistic grants, because you get a grant and you go off and do a business by yourself. You take all the risks, you get all the benefits. But if you spread the risk and the benefits, you have a greater chance of succeeding. So I would do my cooperative economics. Then I would do education and media. I put a fraction of the money into education and media and outreach, because just as important as the material incomes that we have is the ideological components. Secondly, I would start fitness clubs. I don't know why. I mean, I said I've done this. I've tried to attempt this without Jay-Z's money. I would have these communal fitness clubs. And ultimately, the communal fitness club will be training grounds and development grounds for what I call urban militias. And urban militias are really communal defense forces, because anything we build on a communal level is only as good as our ability to defend it and secure it. So we would have everything from low-level childhood wilderness groups to high-level paintball clubs and fitness and health, holistic health, things of that nature, which would ultimately be a militia group or a communal fitness, that type of shit. I'm not going to say the word guerrilla movement. Then, with another portion of the money, and I have to do it. I actually wrote this shit down, breakdown. But then you have to set up your economic ties. I would start to work to make Haiti. I would work to form an organization. I would bring together artists, scholars, researchers, and community leaders throughout the Caribbean, Central and Latin America, and Africa in the Western Hemisphere to start a formal African diaspora political body. And the purpose of this formal economic political body is to create a force that can be ally and eventually unite with the African Union of the nations of sub-Saharan Africa. So I would quickly internationalize this, and I would work to set up the nation of Haiti as the global African diaspora capital of the world. And I would start reforestation, or I would support existing reforestation and other communal socialistic economic development in Africa. So there's so much that could be done. And with $10 million, I could do all of this with half that amount of money. This isn't really cost heavy, because it will all be people centric and people power, and we would only be working with resources available to us. So as we form the diasporic union, or the African diasporic union, we would start to set up sister cities and economic conduits between Black Pan-Africanist communal organizations here in the States, Caribbean, Central Latin America, and even Black folks up in Nova Scotia, Black folks in the Western Hemisphere, with African continents, or with the African nations. So, like, let's say, just for hypothetics, um, Chicago would be a sister city, a Pan-African diaspora sister city with Lagos, Nigeria. Or you take New York City or Brooklyn or Harlem, and it would unite with, let's say, Nairobi, Kenya. And what would happen would be a cultural exchange. We would send students. We would go to set up industries. We would go there. Let's say we send some students there and develop industrial hemp growing, hemp for industrial production and ecological development. Ethiopia is working really hard on reforestation, like Haiti. So you unite Addis Ababa with Port-au-Prince, and they would do a cultural, economic, and resource exchange. And I would start Black folks cooperating with each other, pretty much economic, social, cultural, ideological interweaving of the African diaspora with the African continent, and resources, intellectual, material resources, and cultural resources on both sides. And underneath that, an ongoing development of military capacity, intelligence gathering, and all the other shit that comes with setting up for the countermeasure. Because as we start to do this, everything from the European military, NATO, COINTELPRO, all that shit would come. So we would already have the infrastructure and develop the educational and the operational undercurrent to combat them trying to subvert what is essentially the Black Revolution. So we're ready to combat cultural combat, economic combat, and military armed combat all together. And if Jay-Z broke me off, that's what I would do. That's an overview. I would have to go into deeper details, and I have that shit written down because I planned for the shit. It's just planning and coming up with good shit to do is relatively easy. Getting Black folks with the discipline and willing to put the resources behind that work is relatively hard. So, okay, let's exit fantasy land. Let's take Jay-Z's money and put it on the shelf and come back to reality. Tito asks, what is internationalism? Internationalism, another word for internationalism, is globalization. Globalization is the recognizing and acting and directing, recognizing the interdependence of all nations, and then acting to direct and oversee the interdependence of all nations. The problem with globalization is when you have globalization under white hegemony, it is neo-colonialism. colonialism. Globalization under capitalism is imperialism. So internationalism under capitalism and white hegemony is white domination and imperialism. So I'm not against internationalism or AKA globalization. Like white right wing, because you might find a lot of black people like, oh yeah, the globalists. That is a uh, anti-Semitic code word. They like, oh, the Jewish cabal or the Illuminati, the globalists are here to undermine national sovereignty. But what globalization is under this system is neo-colonialism and imperialism and white hegemony and the total subversion of sovereignty and the interest of the what is called the global south, what we used to call when I was a kid, the third world. So I'm not. So we get on the side of we're anti-globalization, but if black folks go anti-globalization, we end up on that ADOS bullshit. We become petty nationalists. So internationalism is necessary. We have to cooperate on a global scale, especially with the level of technologies and inputs that we have, and the extraction and production and distribution methods and technologies that are available to human beings in 2020. You can't help but have an internationalized economy, an internationalized workforce. Labor unions need to start coordinating globally, because if I can organize a general strike here in Chicago and a corporation can mobilize and send their production to Jamaica or send their production to China, then instead of competing against my fellow man in the United States or US citizens, I'm competing on a global scale. So globalization is inevitable. Globalization didn't really start with white folks. There was globalization when Africa, the Nile River under the Egyptian dynasty in the time of African antiquity, the Nile River was an economic superhighway, and there were reed ships going all up and down there transferring goods and services. Read, they came before Columbus. There were international treaties and economic ties. The Native Americans had the Iroquois Confederacy, which was several nations that spanned two continents that cooperated and shared resources and technology. So the white man didn't invent globalization, but he corrupted it. So a lot of black people are like, well, we're getting screwed over under this globalization, and they start to literally adopt the rhetoric of white nationalists, and they start opposing nationalism or internationalism and opposing globalization from a right-wing perspective, as opposed to evaluating it from a left-wing perspective or a leftist perspective. And that's the problem with it. So basically, internationalism is the understanding the interconnectedness and interdependence of nations across the borders and across globes, and then developing policies and standards for how nations are to interact and engage in everything from trade to negotiations to even warfare. That's what international is. No nation is really free to go its own way, because if the United States is here creating GMOs and then they releasing GMO fish and GMO birds out into the environment with no oversight, then those animals end up all over the world. Or if you got a nation upriver, which is happening, we've got wars and conflict where you have, let's say, just for familiarity, Canada, there's a river that flows from a mountain in Canada and then feeds into a reservoir somewhere in Arizona. And so the Canada starts cutting off and damming up rivers, and then the reservoir empties out, and that's a conflict. So you're going to need internationalism, because human societies and human civilization is really bigger than any one nation or one nation's interest. And it doesn't have to be a situation where all nations are in competition and hostile. It can be cooperation between nations. So don't allow right-wing nationalists to turn us against globalization, because like I said, you're going to end up black people being mad that Nigerian actors and actresses get to play roles, and you get caught up in some really silly, absurdist bullshit, because you're thinking, well, if white folks are using globalization for international exploitation, resource theft, and neo-colonialism, then it must be bad. But it doesn't have to be bad. In fact, nationalism protectionism is negative under capitalism and white hegemony, just like internationalism. Anything you bring up, anything, whether it's a cure for cancer or the colonization of Mars, if white folks are still in control, and if capitalism is still the dominant system of economics and trades and resource development, everything's going to be fucked up. You can invent the most wonderful invention, whether it's a cure for a disease or some refined process for manufacturing goods and services. Once they get, or you can create something cultural, hip hop, and something that was uplifting and empowering becomes something that is driving criminality and sexism and oppression. So, a lot of times we hate things because they're contaminated by the oppressor. And instead of fighting against the contamination that the oppressor contaminates something that good, we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I hope I answered your question. Moving on. I was just curious, what issue in our community would you address first? I would address menticide. The most pressing, damaging issue in our community is menticide. Our inability to think critically, to be historically and rationally grounded. The first and greatest issue, the number one threat to us is menticide, because menticide obstructs our ability to do anything else. All of the solutions that we need, all of the resources that we need to solve all of our problems are available to us right now. But we cannot coordinate those resources and execute those solutions because of menticide. And if you've ever tried to organize anything amongst black folks, for, by, and of black folks, without any white input, any white authority, without white folks' contracts, and without white folks' legal system and all that shit in it, good fucking luck. Show me an example of that happening. And I hate to say it, but that's the first issue I would. And the thing is, when you say first issue, that doesn't mean, well, until we solve menticide, we can't do anything else. That's another hustle that people run, that want to be in power forever. Until we get ourselves right here, we can't do this. Menticide, you make the path by walking it. Nobody's going to pave the way and then we just walk the path. We make the path by trampling down our way through it. So menticide is the number one problem, primary problem, but menticide is not something we can focus exclusively on to the negation of all other problems. We have to address them simultaneously. And there's sometimes we have to give greater priority, emphasis, and time and labor to a specific problem versus another one, but we have to be in the process. Any organization that says we're this one organization for this one thing, and they're not at least coordinating with other people working on interrelated issues, they just playing games. So the government would definitely hit you with some sort of tax evasion charges to subvert you. Well, they can hit me. I pay them. I render unto Caesar's. Fuck. They can hit me with whatever they want, but yeah. Oh, thank you. You said it's a great plan. I wish I could give more details, but that's as much as I can say just in this type of forum. Talk about the role of the World Bank and the IMF of suppressing African liberation. Okay, Carl says, talk about the role of the World Bank and the IMF in suppressing African liberation. Let me see. I wish I was up front. My other books. Every time somebody asks me a question, I think of a book on the shelf. But anyway, this is how that happened. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund were set up to replace what is called gunboat diplomacy. Old, because you can't have neo-colonialism without colonial, like you don't have new Coke without original Coke. So original colonialism was basically what they said, gunboat diplomacy. White folks would show up to a land and said, our God has given us, they bring in the missionaries. That's what Kwame Ture said. First, they come with the missionaries. They say, our God has tasked us with bringing you into the light of the Christ, or our God has tasked us, like the Muslims, to drive out the infidel and make sure you people know the true word of Allah and his prophet so that you can reach paradise. They come in with saying, we are here on a grand mission from a higher power, and you need to listen to us, or we're going to fuck you up. And then they bring in the Marines, or they bring in the military. They bring the saber. They bring the Quran and the saber, or they bring in the missionary and the Marines. The same hustle. But after a few generations of that, Africa, Asia, people developed this thing called asymmetrical guerrilla warfare. And they were like, motherfucker, we gonna kill your ass. And yeah, you can occupy our land, but you won't be able to walk down the street with your umbrella, wearing your knickers and your top hat and smoke your corn pipe, because somebody's gonna jump out the bushes and slit your motherfucking throat. So, as anti-colonial resistance grew up, the Europeans said, yo, not only do we have to fight in our colonies, we're having to suppress uprisings in Africa, Mau Mau rebellions, the Zulu uprisings, and the fucking Caribbean, the Moors, Lord have mercy, the Maroons, and all these people are rising up and beating the shit out of us. And we go there to our corn plantation, and you know we can't even get a good night's rest because they hacking at the sugarcane at night, and they might be hacking at me the next day. And they really good at swinging that machete. So. And plus, we're fighting each other over these the wealthy colonies. So we had 2 world wars. Both of those world wars were the empire colonial nations fighting over us and access to our shit. So they were like, we can't do this. We can't afford it because these brown skin, yellow skin, heathen, savage, godless people, the mud people, they outnumber us 200 to 1. And they're starting to figure shit out. And, you know, every now and then someone will be born. Like, you look at a lot of these revolutionaries. Look at Ho Chi Minh. Where was he educated? He went to France and he learned about the French Revolution and the Jacobins. Look at Kwame Nkrumah. Where was he? Was educated in New York City and Great Britain. And so, like, they're learning our shit. They're learning our history. They're learning their true history that we didn't bring. So all that shit got fucked up. And the white man says, we can't use simply gunboat diplomacy. We can't guerrilla pimp them anymore. So they had to come up with a new way. They said we can surrender our colonies and simply, like Marcus Garvey thought would happen, mistakenly thought, that we can invite these lesser beings, these because white folks only see 2 races, white and non-white. So while we're here arguing about who's white, who's black, who ain't black, and what are Hispanics, what is Latino, the white man, like, y'all can have those debates all you want. Francis Cress Welsing said the white man sees white and non-white. And that's the only 2 classification he needs to know. All that other shit that we debating under his boot, that's not, like, if you step on a colony of ants, you ain't, whether the ants are arguing, the red ants are fighting with the black ants, the fire ants are fighting with the carpenter ants. All you know is I got the boot and I'm going to stomp on all y'all asses. And as long as y'all stay under my boot, y'all can pick all y'all want. But I digress. So anyway, as the they went from slave rebellions to anti-colonial rebellions to asymmetrical guerrilla warfare. These people sat down and it's like, how the fuck do we keep the colonies? Because the only other choice is to allow these people who we know they're talented, we know their true history, we know they are civilization builders. So if we allow them to function within their own space and use their own creativity and imagination and allow them to worship their own ancestors and their own gods, and use their own currency and process their own resources, we're fucked. We're going to be eating bone marrow in caves again. And we won't have the Louvre and we won't have Big Ben won't be chiming anymore, and the British Empire and the American way of life will be doomed. Same shit they say now. Oh, the American way. Black people just saying stop killing us. And white folks are like, this is a threat to our American way of life. And we think white folks are being hyperbolic. We think white folks are like overreacting when they say Black Lives Matter is a threat to America. But it is. They're not lying. Black people living in our full dignity and coming to our full awareness of our value is a threat to America. Because America was built on the opposite of that, dehumanization of African people, and it still relies on it. But I continue to digress. Anyway, some very smart white people, some white psychologists, white social scientists, white economists decided if we give them the illusion of freedom, if we give them the illusion of sovereignty, if we give them the illusion that they are sitting across from us as equal, we can create a situation where we still have all the colonial power we want without having to use all our military resources and send our sons to die on the halls of Mount Mazuma to the shores of Tripoli. Listen to white folks' music. It's all about their pillage and rape and murder across the land. So that's where the IMF, they went from gunboat diplomacy to debt colonization. So what they do is they come in and say, we're so sorry for the last 120 years, 200 years, 45 years, 85 years, we have extracted wealth from your country, refused to allow your people to be educated, refused to allow, because the infrastructure of Africa for well over 2 centuries was nothing but extraction. You go to some African communities and there's only one road going from the mine to the shore. And the communities where people live, it's all dirt roads, you know, and you have the capital where the colonial seat was, and you have the only paved roads were going from the mines to the fields where they grew the food and the cotton and extraction. And they would go to Africa, literally. They would go to Africa and still, they would go to Africa and have huge cotton fields, grow the cotton, or go to India, grow the cotton, grow the herbs, take it to Europe, process that shit into shirts or finished goods, and then sell it back to Africa, you know, and still doing that shit. So they said, you know, we're not going to be fucking castrating men, cutting off the hands of children, hacking at the breast of women and snatching babies off the breast of women and smashing them on stones. We're going to sit here and negotiate deals with you. And because you have gone through 5 to 10 generations of lack of education, lack of economic development, or underdevelopment, we're going to give you a loan. We're going to give you the money you need to develop. We're going to give you the money you need to come into the 21st century. Aren't we grand? Aren't we your best friend? And so before that, there's a little part in there where they decapitated revolutions. Dr. King, Malcolm X, Chairman Fred Hampton, Amilcar Cabral, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba. They decapitated leaders. And then other leaders, they put in leaders like Mobutu Sese Seko, Jomo Kenyatta, Haile Selassie. Sorry, all Rastas listening. He was on the take. They put in corrupt leaders. And one thing about those corrupt leaders, Robert Mugabe. Yeah, I said it, Robert Mugabe. I know y'all love that dude. And they put these corrupt leaders in, and they were like, here are your leaders. You don't need all these crazy militants. Just have these rational leaders. And a lot of those leaders, like Mobutu, was the blackest dude in town. Jomo Kenyatta was like, yeah, get the white man out. Mau Mau, get the white man out. All these militant black leaders who were militant as hell when they standing in front of black folks. But when they went to negotiate with the white man in the boardroom, they took off the dashiki and put on the tap shoes, including Minister Farrakhan. You don't stay in power over black folks for 60 years. You don't stay a prominent black member calling the white man the devil, living in a mansion, like, and you know, okay, but I digress. Y'all get the image. So they got these leaders who negotiated on our behalf, whether it's an African head of state or a black civil rights leader or a black spiritual leader who negotiated on our behalf. And basically the IMF, they went from a system of gunboat diplomacy to debt colonization, or militant or military occupation to debt colonization. They would give these magnificent loans. They even got tricked Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah wanted to electrify sub-Saharan Africa, and he had this grand dam that he wanted to build, a dam that was like the Hoover Dam that would bring renewable electricity to Africa to fuel Africa's industrial development, socialist development, industrial development. And he went to the Russians, and he went to the Egyptians, the Arab Egyptians. He even married, in order to solidify sub-Saharan Africa with Arab occupied Africa, because a lot of people get mad at him, but he married this Egyptian Arab woman in order to like tie the two continents together, so there would no longer be this myth of a sub-Saharan Africa and a North Africa. That's a whole nother sad story, miscalculation on his part, but I digress. Anyway, they came in and told black folks they were going to develop Africa by giving them loans, even though no African that was negotiating this, like, wait a minute, did America develop from loans? from their former colonies? Did America have to go to Great Britain to get loans? How did Great Britain develop? Great Britain didn't get loans. Great Britain, how did France become one of the wealthiest economies? By raping Haiti. So nobody else developed from loans and grants. So anyway, they would give them these loans, these unfavorable loans with these unfavorable terms, with these unreachable interest and repayment structures. And when that happened, African nations would default on the loan. And when African nations defaulted on the loan, they would come in with these things called structural adjustment programs. And structural adjustment programs was the neo-colonialism. And they would come in and say, well, since you failed to pay off this $80 million loans, and the loans were never given directly to Africa. Even when Africa accepted those loans or those grants, those African nations, they would go to Ghana, they would go to Senegal, they would go to Jamaica, they would go to Puerto Rico, they would go to Mexico, they would go to Haiti and say, we'll give you $8 billion or $800 billion. Doesn't matter. We fucking print this money. It's made up from nothing. It's not based on anything. So how much money you want? And then they would say to them, in order to get this loan, you give us a list of projects and we will tell you what contractors to use. And so you go to Haiti and say, Haiti, we're going to give you an $8 billion IMF loan or World Bank loan. And Haiti says, well, our people are contracting cholera from contaminated water. Our sewage system and our water treatment system, we want to put in a modern solar-powered sewage treatment and water system to help our people. And they were like, fine, here's the money. And you're like, give me the money. No, we don't give you the money. Here's our list of contractors. Most of them were American. Here's our list of contractors. Maybe one European contractor, 2 or 3 American. And you need, first, if you're going to do a sewage system, you need an excavation company, a company that's going to come in and dig the fucking shit up. And then you need a company where you're going to source the pipe, whether it's PVC plastic or steel piping or lead line pipes or whatever piping. You need that. Then you need engineers and you need all. And so the IMF and World Bank, along with the United States Department of the Interior and these other diplomatic organizations, United States would go to these countries and say, you tell us who you want to do the work. And from a list we give you, you pick these people. And so let's say I own an excavation company. I'm a white man. I'm a white job creator industrialist. And I get in on this federal government program or this IMF World Bank program to say, well, there's a contract to build, to excavate for a modern sewage and water system in Haiti that's being paid out by a IMF loan. And then I'm like, well, how do you get contracts? The lowest bidder. So I bid well under what it would cost. I get the contract, and then I go to Haiti, and the first thing I do when I get off the boat in Haiti was the man that owns the excavation company is like, where's your OSHA? We don't have an OSHA in Haiti. What's that? Oh, occupational health. Don't worry about it. So where's your environmental minister? We don't have an environmental minister, or we do have an environmental minister. Like, here's a Mercedes for you and a couple of European prostitutes. And he's like, okay. And he turns a blind eye. So they do a fucked up job, or they don't do the fucking job at all. This cracker pockets $10 million, comes back to the United States and looks at black folks who are like, what's wrong with black people in the ghetto? They are on welfare. When you just got an $8 million government grant of corporate welfare, the job doesn't get done. Haitian citizens are still on the hook for the fucking money. And then they come in and say, well, since you failed to pay off this loan and the interest is accruing, you have to surrender to us your fishing rights. Or you have to privatize the water system now. When it was a public thing, now it's a privatized water system. And you have to privatize or give us this amount of land. And that's the structural adjustment program. And a portion of that money will go to the white companies. And another portion of that money will go to pay off the interest of the loan. And they'll never touch the principal of the loan. That's what the IMF and World Bank does. And all that shit they talk about, well, we negotiate international conflicts and we make sure we regulate commerce and regulate the exchange, currency exchange. That's bullshit. Those are neo-colonial bodies. Sheun Kuti has a song called International Motherfuckers. And that song, let's see. That song, International Motherfuckers, will teach you more about the IMF than 100 European or economic articles or research papers. So go search Sheun Kuti IMF. Go download that shit. International motherfuckers. How does Sheun Kuti know? How does he know? Because he lives in a country, Nigeria, that's under several structural adjustment programs. I'm sorry that was a little long-winded answer, but that's the thing. That's why we can't fuck with Mentacide, because we need a historical understanding of problems. Shit is fucked up. Ain't nothing fucked up because it's just for the fuck of it. Everything is fucked up for a reason. And Dr. Amos Wilson told us, if you look at any persistent problem, whether it's persistent violence, persistent homelessness, persistent oppression, persistent any problem that sticks, generation after, stop looking at who suffers and look at who profits. You can't understand any social problem by looking at who suffers. You have to look at who profits from the problem. And when you find who profits from a problem, then you find out who's perpetuating the fucking problem. But just moving on. Okay, where are we? White colonies still don't have any natural resources in their countries to this day. All the resources come from elsewhere. That is absolutely true, co-conspirator. Do white people have this heightened degree of perceived susceptibility and severity of the type of resistance or oppression? Then they study, research, and call it resilience. That's also true. Okay. I agree, and I agree. Shout out. Let's see Facebook. I haven't answered any Facebook questions, but Facebook. Y'all showing any love? Joan asked me, are you worried at all about being so outspoken on social media, face recognition, targeting, woo, woo, woo? No, I'm not worried about face recognition or being outspoken. Why? Because they're not going to pay any attention to me. Dr. Bobby Wright correctly said when he was speaking out prior to social media, but when Dr. Wright was saying things far and above what I am, a lot smarter than me, he said they're not paying attention to me. When I'm speaking out, they're not paying attention to me. They're paying attention to y'all. So if people started resonating with my agenda and ideology, and if Jay-Z showed up with $10 million, then I would have to start worrying. I'd like to get to a position where I have to worry about that. All right, now I'm just a black man in my little South Chicago condo, reading, researching, and trying to articulate for an agenda. And that is not a threat to them. Because, I mean, shit. You guys will determine whether or not I get on anybody's radar. Because if what I do and what I'm saying starts to resonate with the people, and if I understand, I've studied this, I've watched this, if I did start trending, first thing you do is you start to initiate and implement security protocols. And my level of security is consistent with my level of exposure or risk. And as my exposure and risk elevated, then my security protocols start to elevate as well. So believe you me, I don't have a desire to be a martyr for anybody's cause. I want to live. I eat a vegan diet. I move in a way that is intelligent and rational. I wear my seatbelt when I'm driving, and I wear my bike helmet when I'm riding. I'm not a person who takes risks, but this is something that's necessary. I'm willing to accept, and I have faced backlash. I'm willing to accept that, but the people will determine what risk I face and what security I can implement, because as my ideas start to resonate. And I'm a revolutionary. I'm not a reactionary, and I'm not a martyr. So believe you me, if I was in a position of power, of authority, there would be 3 other people underneath me that can immediately step in and fill my role. I would be grooming my replacement. Unlike Farrakhan and many of these other black leaders for life, if I was ever in a position like that, I would be grooming and mentoring my replacement. And I would demand, I got 3 people that I will be grooming to replace me and to fill in. I would demand that each of them have 3 people to replace them. So there would be no centralized head. It's the ideology. You can kill the revolution, but you can't kill revolution. So, no, I'm not really worried. I think this is necessary work. I wish I could be doing more. I work to try to do and conceptualize and execute more, but I don't worry about that. And I don't worry about it because I'm aware of it and I take appropriate action. So I'm not worried about it, meaning I ain't doing shit. I don't worry about it because if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. Ma'at asked, why can't we organize ourselves? We have been organized. We are organized. We're just organized for the wrong shit. Ma'at, not only are we organized, our oppressors have never been able to subvert. Black folks are hella organized. We're one of the most united, organized people in the fucking United States. You won't find a population that all vote for the same party, eat the same food, into the same shit. We got unity, but it's not red. So the question is not how do we organize ourselves. I just went for a walk. Every day I walk with my wife. We go on a 5-mile walk. And we go to this park. And it's 1,000 black folks out there in the middle of freaking pandemic being unified as fuck. So we are organized. You know, there are basketball leagues and football leagues. And I know some black folks that got investment clubs. The problem is, why aren't we revolutionary? You know, you find any other population in the world that was subjected to chattel slavery, generations of chattel slavery, and then generations of oppressive apartheid, sadistic oppression, from lynchings and mutilations to miseducation to drug experimentation, from the Caribbean, the United States. Look at what happened to Africa. You want to look at a tragedy. Look at fucking the African people in Brazil. Outside of Africa, the country with the highest population of people of African descent is Brazil. And they're there, but go look at how they literally had black people excavating mountains with copper tools. They had black people working in the 1800s using tools from the 1500s to excavate literally billions of dollars of wealth from the swamps and rainforests. You look at anybody else that was subjected to what African people have been subjected to of the diaspora and colonization, and they're not here anymore. The Arawaks, the Colonados, other people who were subjected to what we were subjected to vanished from the face of the earth. They vanished. So we are organized. You don't get to live through what our people have been through. We are organized. The problem is we're not revolutionized. We're not radicalized. You want to see organization, get up early. Get up at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning and drive up to any black church. And you see the mother elders, like my grandmother who turns 90, my grandmother, shout out to Grandma Sonetta, turns 90. I wish I could be there with you, but you know, due to quarantine, and I care about your health more than my desire to see you, so I'm not going there. But she raised 6 kids in Kansas City, Missouri, in the goddamn 60s and 70s. And if you know anything about Kansas City is always 20 to 30 years behind the rest of this country, politically and socially. So she damn near raised black kids in apartheid through the Reagan Depression and all of that shit. And you don't get that without organizing, to telling every single one of your kids, you got a little job to do. You got a role to play. You got a contribution to make. And then she raised grandkids after that. So we are organized. We are unified. You know, it's just like Dick Gregory said, if you look at black folks at a party and watch them do that step dance to the left, slide to the right, and it's like one by like a hive mind, like a giant organism. We organize for bullshit. We come together for foolishness. We are not radical. So even when we come together and coordinate our resources for money, for wealth, for status, because we don't have a radical revolutionary ideology, it's no threat to our oppressor. So the real question is not organization or unity. It is radicalization. It is radicalization, revolutionary Pan-Africanism. So that is our problem. Why can't we develop a revolutionary ideology? Black folks, we have unity. Even Dr. Ben, when he was on the lecture circuit, he said the most common question he would get is, why aren't black people unified? And he said, define what unity is. And then he said, what is the scale of unity? Because you know who's disunified? White folks. White folks are, it ain't black people out. White folks are beating the shit out of each other. Antifa and the Proud Boys. White folks fought 2 motherfucking world wars. If black people fought 1 regional war, they call us savages. They killing each other. They savages. The Kikuyu bump heads with the damn Kikuyu and Luo. The Hutus and the Tutsis. Oh my God, it's a genocide. White folks kill more people in a soccer riot than we kill in generation-long wars. They fought 2 fucking world wars together. Right now, there's a war in the Caucasus Mountain. The Armenians been getting killed and fighting and killing the Armenian Turks, the Kurds. So we have, when it comes to conflict amongst and killing your own, nobody beats white folks. After white folks, you got to go to Asia to get the numbers even close to where white folks are. Black people don't even show up on that scale of internal warfare. And it took generations of colonization and chattel enslavement to get us to the level we are now, because it's so unnatural to us. So our problem is lack of radicalization. Whatever you're doing, if you're a black person into academics, if you're a black person in the church for whatever fucking reason you're in the church, if you're a black person into just raising a family and loving your offspring, you better revolutionize and radicalize that shit. You better teach your offspring your love children as you knit shit for them and you sing songs and cradle them to your breast and love them. You better come up with a way to inject, to educate, to inspire them for Pan-African revolutionary struggle. That's the real question, Ma. And I don't mean to deflect from your question, but we got all the organization we need. Black folks are putting together shit. You watch one neighborhood basketball coach, and he can get all these little kids and get them together. Oh, I'm at 58 minutes. I can only do this for an hour, so I'm gonna have to bounce. Who profits from the virus? That's too easy. Look at Wall Street. Jeff Bezos. Bill Gates, what's that other guy who funds Trump? What's the dude's name? Sheldon Adelson, Wall Street, NASDAQ, the Nikkei. So the oppressors, same people who profit off of everything else, the capitalists profit. They make more profit off of hardship and desperation than they do from good times. Am I scared of living in Chi-Raq? No, I'm not scared of living in Chi-Raq. To be honest with you, I fear more for my son. He's a 6 foot, 18-year-old dude with long locks. I've kind of aged out. When I'm in the community, people kind of know me around here, even the people in that life and stuff. And I've worked with, my wife and I have both worked in the Chicago public schools. I'm in the street, and a lot of the people in the life greet her. They know her better than me because she taught many of these people that are out here in the life. And so I fear for my older son. He goes out on dates and he's just out here. And even though he's not involved in any detrimental actions against his community, he could be mistaken for. So, but no, beyond having some concern for my son, but he's a smart dude. He's a mindful dude. He's really receptive to the game. I kick to him about how to keep himself safe or do what my dad taught me, because I grew up in an area I grew up in a region in a time that was much more violent than Chicago. Kansas City, go look it up. Kansas City, Missouri, when I graduated high school in 92, coming up in the late 80s and early 90s of the crack pandemic, and at the height of the time when the gangs from Los Angeles were making the much higher homicide rate. Shout out to Kansas City. Shout out to East Hills Village and all my brothers there who worked to help keep me safe and navigate that. Thank you for wishing my grandma Sonetta a happy birthday. So I don't fear. I feel privileged to live here. I'm happy to be a member of this community, even though I wasn't born and raised here. My wife is from Chicago, but in many ways, this community has embraced me, and I've learned a lot, and I'm happy to be here. And I feel privileged to be here. And I live in Bronzeville too, so it's a historic Black neighborhood. I live in close proximity to the historical homes of some great writers. So I'm happy to live here. I feel privileged to live here, and I really don't have any intention of leaving anytime soon. So it's not really a fear thing. Well, we reached the 1 hour mark. Showtime is making a movie about John Brown, showing him as a raving lunatic. Why the need to show him that way? Come on, man. Quit with these easy questions. You must be, you should go work for Trump. Them the kind of questions they give Trump. They have to show John Brown as a madman because, you know, uh, and then they made that movie, that Broadway play about Hamilton, that slave raping pedophile scumbag. And so white folks, history. I had a I had a history professor who was Harvard trained white woman, and I would come to her class and she would tell history, and I would ask her questions that she couldn't answer. And she said to me, and I'll end with this. She said to me one time, "You think all white people are bad? You make it so that white people are the worst people." And because I was like, "Well, that's not true. This is not true." And so I'm like, and I responded to her, "I don't make it so that white people are the worst people in history. I said you do, and white people make it so." And she was confused. So I asked her, I said, "Have you ever heard of Smedley Butler?" And she said no. And so I asked her a few other obscure historical figures, and she didn't know any of them. And I admit I probably try to find the most obscure white historical figures I could think of to kind of throw her off. And I said, white people create monuments to the monsters, and they suppress the knowledge of their heroes. So we have, like, now people are more aware of that. Confederate generals, George, there's a Washington monument and monuments, and on the currency, there are literal genocidal murderers and pedophiles on US currency. And that doesn't mean there aren't any good white people. And I said to her, the best way to get written out of white history is to be a just and upstanding individual. There are no holidays, no monuments, no national monuments, no holidays, no money, no great grand gestures to recognize any true European revolutionary or true just and righteous white people. Like, instead of having Washington, William Lord Garrison, he wasn't the greatest man, but he was a true abolitionist. When do you find any white person you know that has brought up the name outside of school has ever brought up the name of William Lord Garrison? Smedley Butler is the greatest soldier that ever fought in the U.S. Armed Forces, and not because he was on some Rambo shit, but he literally stopped a coup d'etat, a royalist, capitalist, elitist coup d'etat in the United States after World War II. You never hear his name. Why? Because he was a just figure, and he was fighting against the DuPonts and the Rockefellers and other industrialists. Why don't you hear of these people? They're good white people. Right now, there's a political prisoner there's a white Mumia Abu Jamal. There's this anarchist political prisoner who was framed for a crime. He was doing an act, but his name is Sean Swain. Go look his shit up online. He's smart and he's fucking hysterical. They don't talk about, why aren't white kids walking around with fucking Sean Swain shirts the way we walk around with like fucking Mumia Abu Jamal. Any white person that tries to do good, like you said, the fucking slave trader, scumbag, rapist, Hamilton gets a Broadway play. While as John Brown, a great white man, one of the greatest white men that ever got pooped out by a white woman, he's portrayed as a raving lunatic. Where's John Brown Day? So white folks like to say, well, you think we're evil. You think the white man's the devil. I'm like, no, you think you're a devil because you have heroes. There are white people, and I know y'all gonna get mad at me, that are just as good for white folks as Martin Luther King. That fought for liberation of white folks, that fought for justice for white women. And even the people they try to say were righteous, you turn one page in their biography and you see they were pieces of shit. So that's why white folks, in order to maintain capitalism, they have to turn heroes into villains and turn villains into heroes. And I weep for all the white children who are told to look up to all of these heroes, from John Wayne to look up. I mean, Karl Marx. I read Karl Marx. I couldn't get through Capital. That book was boring. I'm not an economist, and I don't need to read that to understand. But I've read a lot of books by Marx, and I read books about Marx. And his main mission was to humanize white folks. He didn't have much concern for blacks or nobody else. His main mission in the life was to humanize white folks. And he figured, since my people are so materially oriented, the way you humanize white people, it's time? Okay. The way you humanize white folks is by humanizing their economic, material, or relationship. And Marx is that you go anywhere in America and say Karl Marx and see if white folks don't start hissing at you like angry cats. Marx, and they insult each other by like, you're a Marxist. That would be like black people taking Malcolm X or Dr. King and using that as an insult. Oh, what are you, some kind of Malcolmist? Are you some kind of Kingist? You know, he was a good guy for them. Now, I'm not saying whatever they, well, he didn't like us. He ain't for us. We don't need him to like us. So that's why. And I'm going to end with that. Shout out to everybody. Shout out to Chauncey. Appreciate you. Wouldn't be able to do this without you. Go to diallokenyatta.com. Check my archives. Search my archives for more insights. Thanks to everyone that asked questions. Sorry if I didn't get to your question. Patreon. Try to support the media and the work we're doing. Check that out. And the book review is coming soon. We edited. My son said his computer crashed, so the book review had to be re-edited and uploaded and all that stuff. So anyway, so the book review should be up tomorrow or Monday, the latest. And I have another talk that I want to do to the community. I want to talk about race, riots, and rationality. Will probably be our next discussion for Bro Diallo Live. Y'all stay safe. And again, pray for coronavirus. Coronavirus has contracted Donald Trump and is sick. Has been infected with Donald Trump. So pray for coronavirus. Speedy recovery.